Salam and welcome to the Narrative House podcast. I'm your host, Shazad Chowdhury, and today we have a very important topic for you, the slaughter of Gaza. It approaches 20 months. And as the war rages on, another war rages on, which is the war of narratives, the war of history, the war of moral legitimacy. Today we're here to discuss the key moral arguments made in the defense of Israel's actions in Gaza, claims that dominate headlines and dominate political chambers worldwide. We'll interrogate them head on today, and to discuss them with me and to unpack the arguments is Adnan Khan, the host and founder of the Geopolity. Welcome, Adnan. Salams.
Salam.
If you find this conversation valuable, please like, subscribe, and share so we can get the message out. Adnan, let's get into it. Question number one, Adnan. Does the Jewish people have a right to a land, have a right to self-determination?
So, Shazad, do the Palestinian people have a right to a land, have a right to self-determination? I ask this because the assumption here is because of Jewish history, they have an exclusive right to that land. And the Palestinian people have been on that land. They've been there for a long period of time. Do they have a right? And this is really the problem with this point of view. People have a right to exist. People have a right to live where they want. If Jews or anybody wants to come and live in the Holy Lands, they should be allowed to. I personally have nothing against that. There are people who have beliefs different to you and they want to come and live in that land. The problem that we really face today, Shazad, is Zionists, and I use the word Zionists rather than Jews, because not all Jews are Zionists. Zionists are people who believe in a nation for the Jews, and not all Jews believe in that. They believe that they have a right to this land to the exclusion of everybody else, and that's the problem. They believe that they want to live there, and I'm sure we're going to go through all the arguments that they raise for this, to the exclusion of everybody else. And that's why all the arguments about the Jewish homeland and their rights and their history is based upon we have some unique right and you need to leave for us to fulfill that right. And that's the problem. There are people who have been on this land longer than the Jews have. There are people who have been on this land in more recent history longer than the Jews have. So really, what we need to talk about is how can different people live on this land and coexist. What we're getting from Zionists is we have all these rights to the exclusion of everybody else. And somehow it's become acceptable that because the Jews have to come and live here, everyone else just needs to live.
But it sounds like you're denying the biblical right, a Bible that billions believe in, by the way, for the Jews to rule and have a right and connection to that land. Are you just dismissing the religious history of these people?
No, I recognize this biblical claim. I mean, look, to be honest, I could write a book and give myself a land.
That sounds quite dismissive, Adnan.
Well, look, I recognize the Jews have a right there, but like I said, the Jews are more than welcome to come and live there like anybody else as well. The problem that we have is they have a right to live there too. No one else is, so the Palestinians aren't arguing that we want to live there to the exclusion of everybody else. The only people arguing that are the Zionists.
But that's the fundamental. There's a difference. Palestinians have somewhere to go. Morocco to the Gulf is a huge expanse of Arab land. Jews have nowhere else to go. They're victims of a Holocaust that happened in recent memory. Where else should they go?
The Palestinian people, they're called that, but they're indigenous to their land. They actually don't have anywhere else to go to. This is their land. This is the land their ancestors were. This is the land where their identity is. The Ashkenazi Jews that we're talking about, actually, until the late 1800s, their vision for their future was in Europe. They wanted to be accepted in Europe. Then a movement emerged, a Zionist movement, who said we need our own homeland because of the persecution that we're having. So this Zionist idea of a national homeland is a relatively recent phenomena. In fact, when the Zionists first emerged in Europe, the ulama of the Jews, their experts, they viewed Zionists as Khawarij. These are bid'ah individuals who are introducing this new idea into modern Judaism. However, they managed to obviously gain a lot of influence. Again, they can come and live there. They've been there. We recognize when we came to this land as Muslims, we recognize the Jews have always been here. The problem here is the apartheid and the fact that they believe they should be there to the exclusion of everybody else. That is something we as Muslims have never and will never advocate, that we should be on a land to the exclusion of all other people.
But that's not what we hear. We don't hear that they were excluding other. What we hear is that when Jews arrived in the turn of the 20th century, it was an empty land, an undeveloped land, an underpopulated land. It was a land that was there for the taking. It was empty.
Mm. Yeah, this is a common Zionist argument. We have documented evidence from the Ottomans who did census over the whole Ottoman lands, including Palestine, because it was under Ottoman rule from around 1500 onwards. We have, under the British mandate, the documentary evidence they have of the census, the population, the resources that were in this region. And according to all that data, this was not an underdeveloped land. Okay, it wasn't the most urban land in the world because many people did farming. But what you had was a population there, mixture of Arab Jews, Muslims, and Christians who lived side by side together, and there wasn't the challenges that we have now. This argument that there was nothing there, this is a very, very modern argument by Zionists, and again, it's another justification. But the documentary evidence says the complete opposite.
And then, do you have any sympathy for the Jewish people?
Oh, absolutely.
They were victims themselves, weren't they, once upon a time? How can you accuse an oppressed people of being oppressors themselves?
So look, I've studied World War II, and what happened to the Jews was horrific. What they faced was horrific. And as far as I'm concerned, that 6 million figure is probably the minimum figure. It was probably even higher. We go with a 6 million people were persecuted or died, that's probably a minimum figure. It was probably higher. So, considering what world population was at the time, the brutal thing that actually occurred at the time, I think we have to ask the question, why did it happen in Europe? Why did the Holocaust of this scale or genocide of this scale not happen in any other part of the world? Because the Europeans had a particular view of Jews. They were racist. They persecuted them. In fact, most Jews lived in ghettos because they were considered the fifth column. Even though the Jews tried to interact, again, you see the Jewish struggle isn't actually that different to the Muslim struggle today. They weren't accepted. Their beliefs were seen as fringe, as weird, and they were persecuted as well. So I have every sympathy for the Jews, what they went through. However, look, we measure a people on the actions they're doing. So you could be persecuted one time, but when you commit a crime or when you do something wrong, we need to call it out. We shouldn't be not calling things out. So if someone's committing a genocide, we can't not call it a genocide because they were victims of a genocide. But you have Jews alive today who are horrified at what Israel's doing. So you have people like Norman Finkelstein whose family were victims of Auschwitz. They were in there. And he's saying, what is Israel doing that's any different to what his family were on the receiving end of? So it's absolutely, it's a shame. If anything, if you are a people who are victims of a genocide, you should understand it even more, and you would never actually perpetrate that. And let me get this straight. I'm not saying all Jews are committing genocide. There is every organization that was established, every institution that was established to monitor genocides, to call them out, every human rights organization that looks at humanitarian issues, they are all collectively saying that the genocide taking place. It's a shame that the Jewish state that was established to protect the Jews is in that situation. It's actually a shame. It should never be like that. If you're a victim, you should be even more understanding. But we're just calling out. This is a statement of fact. It's a statement of reality. This is what we're observing, and we're just calling out.
You've condemned Europe's treatment of Jews in World War II. What about Muslims? Are Muslims anti-Semites? Is that where their hatred of Israel comes from?
So again, there's another common argument. So let's look at what's happened here. You had Muslims, Palestinians living in Palestine, and another people arrived, and over time they were pushed out, and to the point where they were expelled from the land. So as far as these people are concerned, they're entering into a liberation struggle in order to remove the occupation and to regain their land. So in many ways, the ethnicity, the background, the color of the perpetrator is irrelevant. Because this argument effectively says, if it was Hindus or Aborigines or aliens, these people would have accepted it. The only reason they are not accepting the expulsion from that land is because they're Jews, which is a ludicrous argument. The response of the Palestinian people would have been the same, whoever the perpetrator was. So this is not, it's got nothing to do with the faith of the people. The issue here is people have their lands being taken from them, they've been expelled, and they're fighting back. Their religious beliefs and all of that are only important from the perspective of what's the drive of these people to do that. their defense has nothing to do with their color. The defense will be the same. I've lost my land. I want to regain it back.
But do you really believe that? I mean, Hamas says in their original charter, the 1977 version, it refers to Jews as being people who control media, who control politicians, who control Hollywood.
Mm.
Isn't that anti-Semitic?
So it's quite interesting. The Hamas charter is quoted by a lot of people. It's quoted by Zionists all the time. Even though the charter was in Arabic originally, and also they've changed their charter as well. I think 2016, 17,
17.
they changed their charter as well. Look, if we look at the liberation struggle, because the liberation of Palestine, the battle started before Hamas even existed. They weren't even there from the beginning. And so what you have here is people have been kicked off their land, and they are fighting, engaging in armed struggle to get it back, which is what happened in all liberation battles. And what you find in all liberation battles is the perpetrators come out with concepts and ideas to delegitimize the people who are trying to liberate themselves. And then after they win, what you find is they become heroes and they're held up. Nelson Mandela wasn't doing diplomacy. Che Guevara wasn't doing diplomacy. The French, when they're occupied by the Nazis, weren't throwing flowers at them. So this is what happens when you use your land. Now, would I have liked this to happen? Absolutely not. This should never have happened. What should have happened is people shouldn't have been kicked off their land. What shouldn't have happened is Jews being persecuted in Europe. What should have happened is what did happen in the Middle East for a long time, where you had Arab Jews who lived side by side with Muslims. That should have continued. In fact, when the Jews first turned up in Palestine, the Muslims recognized you guys are coming from a Holocaust, you're being persecuted. Problems began when it became clear you're not just coming to live it, you want the whole land. And that's when the tension and the problems actually started.
You spoke about liberation movements, Adnan. You mentioned Nelson Mandela, his movement. Do all liberation movements use terrorist tactics? Hostage taking, for example?
So terrorism, the use of terror, the use of fear to achieve your political aims, didn't start on 9/11, didn't start on 7/7, didn't start on 7th October. These are tactics that have been used throughout history. They've been used by people from all conceivable backgrounds, from Victorian era anarchists, from intelligence officers. The British Empire used it throughout their history. So terrorism has become this loaded political term where actually everyone's been used. The tactic, what we call terrorism, those tactics have existed throughout history. So why are they called terrorism today, but they were just normal tactics in the past? So there's a political goal here, is to delegitimize certain acts. But remember, if terrorism is carrying out armed acts, what we find is some armed acts in some countries are perfectly fine, but other armed acts in other countries are considered terrorism. So this is all political, really. It's all political. So when Israel carries out acts which are terrorists in any other place, they're a state, they defend themselves. When the Palestinians do it, it's always terrorism. Now, ideally, no one should need to use these tactics to liberate their land. But remember, the Zionists didn't establish Israel in 1948 by sitting around a round table and coming to an agreement with the tribes of Palestine. They did it by utilizing terrorist groups. They did it by seizing the territory. They did it by expelling the people. We still have, I think, 750,000 people, Palestinians, living in the land and they were expelled. Around a quarter that are still alive today, and children who were born around them are still alive today. And they will tell you what happened. They lost their land and the tactics the Zionists actually used. In fact, the tactics the Zionists actually used, shockingly, look eerily similar to the tactics being utilized by liberation movements today. So this is a very loaded term, this terrorism, and it's a term that the West invented, and they impose it on everybody else.
So do you believe in Israel's right to defend itself?
So let's put this into perspective. Do the Russians have the right to defend themselves in Ukraine? Ludicrous question. But the Russians are being attacked in the territory they've seized in Ukraine. It will be ludicrous for them to say to anyone, we have the right of self-defense when you're sitting on occupied land. So when the Israelis are defending themselves...
But this is different, Adnan, because Israel were attacked on the 7th of October in their territory.
Look, if we look at it broadly, what happens to occupiers? The Europeans colonized the world. They were the occupiers. And they faced liberation struggles, they faced attacks. Why? They're occupiers. That is what happens to occupiers. That's the French experience in Algeria. That's the British experience in India. That's the German experience in Africa. So what you find, if you occupy a land, no matter what you call it, no matter if you don't even recognize the rights of the indigenous people, what the indigenous people will do is they will fight back. So international law even recognizes the right to armed struggle in situations of occupation. Francesca Albanese, the UN representative of the occupied territory, she mentioned this time and time again, that if you're under occupation, you have the right to defend yourself using armed struggle. Her point is the occupier has no right to self-defense because you are the occupier. So I know everyone looks at everything from 1967 onwards. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, and as far as the Arabs are concerned, 1948 was when the occupation began, not 1967, not afterwards. What's just happened is Israel's expanded its occupation. So if they're occupying, they have no right to claim self-defense. They're the one in the wrong.
Once Australia, Canada, the United States, we would have called these occupied territories. They would have been considered at that time to be occupied territories. We don't consider them occupied territories anymore. Isn't there a point, Adnan, where you just accept that these are the terms, this is the state, the losers have lost, and now this is the new reality? Shouldn't Palestinians just come to the table and accept that they've lost?
Yeah, so if you're Aborigine in Australia, if you're Native American in America, as far as you're concerned, this is occupied land, no matter how many years have gone by. And if we go by what the Canadians and the Americans and the British and Australians did, then that doesn't bode well for the Palestinians. What it means is if we massacre you and commit a genocide and put you in concentration camps, as long as a certain amount of time goes by, then it's perfectly okay. It's not perfectly okay. Now, I recognize in the case of America, well, we know what they did to they committed a genocide. That's what they did to the indigenous people. They committed a genocide, and now 250 plus years have gone by. That doesn't make it okay. And the reason why you have very few Native Americans in that region is because you committed a genocide. So what Israel's doing, and remember, Israel is the child of the Europeans. They were the one that gave it birth. They are just following the footsteps of their parents. That's what they want to get to. They want 100 years to go by and people don't even know what a Palestinian was. Because that is exactly what their forefathers did. And that's what we need to actually stop from happening. And I'm not advocating the way we stop that happening is we commit a genocide on the Israeli people. I'm absolutely not advocating that. I'm not saying the way we liberate from the river to the sea is you commit a genocide. In fact, the Islamic history shows we live side by side. The problem here is, and I've mentioned this before, is the Zionists want to live here to the exclusion of everybody else. And that is the fundamental problem.
So Israel has had multiple wars with its Arab neighbors and it's defeated them every single time. Isn't there a point where you just accept that Israel is a state, we should recognize it, and it's just, this is the outcome, we have to accept it?
So we have this interesting scenario at the moment where you're absolutely right. The rulers have accepted Israel. Some collaborate and engage with Israel as a normal nation. Others engage and collaborate with Israel behind closed doors. But this is the minority. The majority, which is the Palestinian and the 500 million Muslims in the region, they have not accepted it. So I agree with you. If they gave up and called it a day.
So Muslims are anti-Semites then?
No, so anti-Semitism is because they're Jews, that's why we hate them, for their Jewishness. The issue here is they're trying to liberate themselves and they're trying to stop the expulsion of themselves from that land. So the ethnicity, these people, is irrelevant. The anti-Semitism is your problem is because they're Jews. So if somebody else did it, it's perfectly okay. That's not the reality. The reality here is there's a people who lived on the land, they've been kicked off, and they're entering into a liberation struggle. Now, if they lose the struggle and they accept it, that's one thing. But for the last 75 years, they haven't accepted that. Despite, you got to remember, Shazad, that it's not the Palestinians that have tank regiments. It's not the Palestinians that have an air force. It's not the Palestinians that have nuclear weapons. So actually, you're right. This should have been over a long time ago. The genocide didn't start on October 7th. Israel's been doing this since day one. This has been their agenda. They've been openly about it. What's happened is they're having to deal with the people who refuse to roll over. So yes, anybody else might look at this, but this is what happened in liberation struggles. Your homeland, your ancestral home, your people, this is what happens. And remember, in most cases of liberation struggles in history, the weaker party in the long run wins. America learned that the hard way in Afghanistan.
But it doesn't look like they're winning at the moment. Israel has superior military, superior intelligence, superior air force, superior nuclear. Well, it has nuclear weapons. There has to be a point where the other Arab countries and the Palestinians recognize that it just can't be defeated.
So they refuse to roll over and accept it. They've always have accepted it, absolutely. They accepted it. Some publicly say that, some publicly don't. They've accepted it. They want to normalize. The Abraham Accords is all about that. The Palestinian people and the broader Muslim Ummah, they refuse to accept it. Look, it's interesting. You know, you're right. Israel has every metric is superior. So why, after 75 years, they're still having to commit a genocide to take over the land? What you find is they, on paper, they should be winning this. But this is what happens in liberation battles. It's not a paper exercise. What you find is people's emotions, people's motivation, people's history gets in the way. So the ideal for Israel would be recreate circumstances where you just think, just forget it. Can't live there.
So you're right, Muslims and Palestinians have refused. Israel have put multiple offers on the table for a peace. There was the Camp David, there was the Taba Summit in 2001, there was the Olmert offer in 2008. Each time, Palestinian leadership said no. So isn't it the Palestinians who are really blocking peace and blocking progress?
So let's put these agreements into perspective. Firstly, this is not it's not a negotiation where you've got equal parties. What you've got is a people who have lost most of their land and what's left is dwindling. Negotiating with a party who took over the land and the amount of land occupied is growing. So it's not equal parties. So when these talks happen, the beginning point is for Israeli security, there are some non-negotiable terms. That's where it always starts from. So the way these negotiations will work and end is you Palestinians just need to accept you've lost, give up your territory and take the crumbs in the corner of Palestine. That is the ideal scenario, and that's the scenario they're working for. That's not a negotiation, is it? So you're right, the Palestinians are fighting from a position of weakness when they shouldn't be, because there's 500 million of them in the region. They've got armies in the region. They've got resources in the region. This shouldn't really be the scenario. Unfortunately, what you've got, though, the rulers have sold out the Palestinian people. So the Palestinian people are having to fight on their own, or what you've had is liberation movements, or armed movements have emerged. And armed movements, look, they might hurt Israel here and there. It's not existential as much as Israel says it is. So these negotiations, they're not negotiations. What they are is here's our terms and accept them. And what you find half the time is Israel then adds more terms to these agreements.
But isn't it by not accepting those terms that Hamas are prolonging the suffering of the Palestinian people?
So if Hamas didn't exist, we would have the same problem. In fact, the problem started before Hamas existed. It exists today, and it will exist after Hamas is long gone. It's an issue of occupation, and it's an issue of expulsion of the people. So that's why, yeah, there could have been other groups that emerged. There probably will be other groups in the future. The fundamentals of the issue remain the same. You've got a people who are trying to defend what they've lost, and you've got a people who are trying to occupy it. In the long run, the occupier loses.
But isn't it also the case that if Hamas or whoever replaces them, if there is one, if they put their weapons down, then the bloodshed would be over?
Look, this is, we talked about the superiority of Israel's military. I mean, it's funny, if Israel's got superior military, why do they need to put their weapons down when you've got superior military? Like, we're talking here like the Palestinians have got tanks and an air force and artillery, electronic warfare. That's not the reality. Like, what weapons are you asking them to put down? What weapons are they actually fighting with? Okay, they've got some rockets, but these rockets, to be honest with you, are not technology advanced. They're useless. Yeah, this is not an equal battle. What's just happened there is because the world is watching, even Israel has to be careful, despite how far it's gone. You know, Israel had this moral argument that we're in a legitimate battle here. Holocaust happened, and we're just trying to survive. They're the problem. What's happened the last 20 months? It's dawned on them that actually the Israelis seem to be the bad guys. It's actually not the Palestinians. And I say this because there are people I've come across, they're not Muslims, they're not Palestinians, neither are they Jewish, they're neutral. And these were people who believed Holocaust is bad, two-state solution not perfect, but it's probably the best we can get. Even they are saying Israel's gone too far. This week, Piers Morgan has said Israel's gone too far. That means something. So this issue isn't actually to do with the Palestinians. If the Israelis give some land to the Palestinians, that's them resolving it. The Israelis have decided we want the whole thing and more, and they're not even hiding this.
But do you recognise, Adnan, that if Hamas put their weapons down, the killing would stop today? But if Israel puts its weapons down, it's obviously still exists.
So Israel's made clear that their ultimate goal is they want to see the removal and destruction of Hamas. Hamas put their weapons down, they're killed. Hamas have their weapons, they're going to be killed.
But that's somewhat understandable, isn't it?
But
because
remember,
Hamas has stated that
I don't think we can reduce this issue to Hamas has weapons. No weapons, there's no war. They have weapons, there is war. Because Israel was doing the actions it's doing today before Hamas even existed. They will continue doing that action because the goal, Hamas is the bogeyman being used today. I recognize Hamas did some actions, which obviously are having an effect. And we see the response of Israel. But the broader struggle is the same. The PLO at one moment was an armed group. They were a problem. Yeah, you got Hamas there, and I'm sure other groups will emerge in the future. These specific groups, they're being used to tarnish the whole liberation struggle and muddy the broader issue that's actually going on. The issue here is the Zionist agenda from the beginning has been the whole of Palestine and more. And every era they've used one argument or another to actually achieve it. The latest one is what happened on October 7th. Right? And look, I'm not advocating that October 7th was a good thing. I'm not saying it should have happened. I'm saying it shouldn't have happened. It should never have been needed. It should never have happened because the land shouldn't be occupied in the first place. So the point is, this is what happens when you occupy land. What was the experience the French had in Algeria? What was the experience the British had in India? What was the experience the USSR had in Afghanistan? It was the same experience. They were and again, in each case, they were dealing with individuals who took up arms. So these are the tactics they use.
Adnan, what do you make of the point that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East? Why don't we speak about that more often?
In 1933, Germany was also a democracy. It's neither here or there. Is it okay for Israel to commit a genocide because they're a democracy? Is it okay for Israel to commit acts of slaughter, burn babies alive because they're a democracy? And if the justification is they're a democracy is quite laughable, Israel's not had the majority government for over a decade. And Israel actually isn't the only democracy in the region. Iran has elections. But it's neither here or there. It's not okay for them to slaughter people because they're a democracy. But if they're going to hold that card that we're a democracy, well, if this is the best democracy, if this is the card you're using for democracy, basically shows you where democracy is. And remember, to be honest with you, confidence in democracy is rock bottom around the world anyway.
Adnan, we're nearing the end of our show now. Couple last questions. If Israel gave back Gaza to the people, what do you think would happen?
So look, if they gave Gaza back, look, Gaza is one snapshot of a broader problem. So this is like Israel said recently, we've allowed 10 aid convoy trucks in, right? You know, they need hundreds a day, right? This is crumbs. If we give this, if we do that, the problem, it's like the British did and the French did, is, you know, if we allow you to come into Parliament, if we consult you, look, we're giving you something, you still remain the occupier. You are still the occupier. That's the fundamental problem. And that, the way the Zionists are addressing that is apartheid. We are going to expel these people, or we're going to rule over them and they get no rights, they have nothing, and they just have to accept it.
If you was in Netanyahu's position, what would you have done? On the next day, on the 8th of October, would you have done anything different at all?
So if I was in Netanyahu's position, I would have resigned because it happened on my watch. If your one job, and you've said it yourself, Netanyahu, is security, I'm strong on security, well, you've completely failed, right? And we now know Netanyahu received, or the government received, 3 pieces of intelligence over years that this was happening. The Americans told them a year before. The Egyptians told them something's being planned. Israeli watchers, these are people who live around Gaza, whose job is to watch any funny movement. They reported it up the chain. You had all this intelligence and they refused to accept Hamas could even do this and even pull it off. So I would have resigned the day after. Broadly speaking, the question needs to be, what drove a people to do an act like that? And can you really divorce that from the broader problem of occupation, settler, colonialization? What I think the Zionists obviously do is, how on earth can anyone do that, right? But there's no tactics the Hamas have done that the Israelis haven't utilized. How did the Israelis, they call it the liberation battle 94, how did that happen? They had terrorist gangs, they committed atrocities, they expelled people. So Hamas are utilizing the same tactics they utilized. Now, I'm not advocating this should be going on, but the underlying issue, so obviously for Israel, it's not good for them if you open up these can of worms, the underlying problem. The underlying problem is we're a reality. So if you fight us, that's the problem. Whilst no, the broader issue is the occupation, settler colonization, that's not being addressed.
Great. Thank you, Adnan. We've heard the arguments, we've heard the slogans, and we peeled back the layers on the arguments. Thank you everyone very much for watching. And if we've helped you understand the topic better, please like, subscribe, share, and get the information out there.